All right, good morning, everybody. How you doing, Mr. Gravatt?
Good morning.
You were the only one with your camera on there, and I figured I'd call you out. We've got about 30 folks or so, so we can go ahead and get started here. Before we kick off and start talking about cost recovery and PIMs and such, is anybody from OPC or the utilities here that could comment on the status of the settlement? Last time I recall, they were working on some clarifications and need some additional time.
Your Honor, this is Dylan Voorhees with VEIC. If Nicole isn't on, I can comment on that, but I know she was working on that just this morning.
She has not joined us yet.
Okay. I probably that's because she's trying to get an email off right now. We did try last week to get just feedback, make sure we were expressing everything clearly with the utilities, and I think that is done at this time, and everyone signed off on what language she's drafted. So my expectation would be an email to the work group imminently.
Excellent. Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate that.
Okay.
This one. And there's one other item. We can either talk about it today if parties are ready to, or we can throw it in kind of with our miscellaneous items. Was the BPA, NEEP, and MEEA had a workforce development proposal, and the utilities had responded to that. But that was more of a reminder for myself, just to keep that on your radar. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, no problem. All right. But just keep that in the back of your mind. All right. So who's going to be fielding questions from the utilities on their cost recovery filing?
Good morning, Judge McLean. Can you hear me? This is Chris Walls from BGE.
Yes, sir, I can. Oh, and just as a reminder, I am recording this this meeting. All right. Thank you, Mr. Walls. You just want to kind of throw it out there for questions, or you want to give an overview? I'll defer to you, sir.
I'd like to provide an overview first, to actually kind of walk through what we have provided, and certainly happy to take questions, and then also put my utility compatriots on notice too, that they're welcome to jump in and chime in and answer questions similar to what we've done in the past. But I'm here to participate and provide a summary. So if you're good, I'll kick it off now.
Please do, sir.
Okay. So first off, good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Chris Walsh from Baltimore Gas and Electric, representing the utilities for cost recovery and the PIM conversation. And also optimistically coming from you from Catonsville, Maryland, where it might get to 64 degrees today. So hopefully spring is springing around here at some point. We can't wait for the winter to be done, that's for sure. So first off, the joint utilities certainly appreciate the proposal we have put together for us, and we look forward to continuing this conversation. And we also acknowledge certainly that the commission is interested, and they're very clear to us and the interested parties to develop solutions regarding the unamortized balance and the return and the surcharge to our customers. At the same time, though, I want to provide a reminder in the utilities, on behalf of the utilities, provide a reminder that, and I'll get into this in a little bit more detail later, but the amortization setup, this context or construct rather, was set up well over a decade to sort of match the time period of investments for the time period that the customers are getting benefits from these programs. And some of you might even have been on many of those calls. I know I was on those calls going all the way back to 2008, where we had long and thoughtful conversations about how we were going to embark on achieving these policy goals. And The idea is to not front load the costs for the amortization period, but like I said, to match the benefits that customers receive with the timing of the benefits. Additionally, we want to clear up a statement that a couple statements that were made around where we are in the cost recovery approach right now. And to be clear, the utilities every single year have to reach out to fund the capital associated with Empower Maryland. Every single year we go through this process, and based on this approach, we look at all investments across the companies, and all the utilities do this, and Empower is one component of that. So it's not as if because we're collecting currently, we no longer have to fund. Every single year we have to fund Empower Maryland. And then consequently, or in parallel, we're also collecting on the current investments. Like I said, I'll be going over the details of our proposal, but we also want to reiterate very much that this is a good faith effort by the utilities, and we very much appreciate the nature in which these conversations are happening. They we believe them to be very, very productive, and we believe that all of us are being very, very good partners in working through these very, very complex topics, and all of us working together. And of course, you look back over the last 10 years, we've very much demonstrated that we're all working together in this to achieve common goals. One thing to be clear, however, is that there is a bit of concern, and I think rightly so, uncertainty associated with where we're headed. We're moving from energy savings to a GHG abatement type of goal. And with that, while we're very, very excited about this new prospect and the prospect of new programs to deliver for our customers, and to further the state's policy goals, I think we would all admit that there's a fair amount of uncertainty associated with the and the potential for future programs that we've never implemented before. So, I guess in summary, that's sort of our while we're excited, there is a bit of uncertainty associated with these future goals, because these are things that we've not done before. We don't know, the way I like to describe it is we don't know the levers yet that we can push and pull in order to achieve these goals. But like I said, I think that when you look at over the last decade plus of how we've all participated and partnered with each other, I think our history speaks for itself of how we've been able to work together. And that I'll weave this in the subsequent comments as well. But the introduction of a PIM, while certainly there are pros and cons associated with the PIM, and we did propose a PIM, there is a bit of apprehension around that PIM, again, because I go back to the comment that I've made, which is that there is some uncertainty associated with how we're going to be delivering for a GHG abatement, and that being the primary focus, and the uncertainty associated with perhaps new programs and new approaches. So with that, let me just get into the proposal. You probably know by now I don't have a specific presentation or a set of slides, but rather just commentary and summary around our particular proposal. So first off, and we put this up front just to be clear, and I've already mentioned it here, but the excerpts that we provided from our past filings primarily mention energy savings as the goal, and I just want to acknowledge up front, we clearly know that the future programming work group and conversations we've had certainly have us going in a GHG abatement direction. So even though these particular filings in the past mention megawatt hours as the goal, we acknowledge certainly it's GHG abatement with perhaps a few more details, of course, that we've all talked about, which is certain bumpers and certain areas of focus, but to try to be comprehensive in the development of our goal. So the first component is the amortization period, and I touched on this a little bit before, but I'll unpack it a little bit more for anyone that might be new to these conversations, and talk through this a little bit more as well, which is that just like a distribution investment, we look at energy efficiency, and we've looked at in the past, and we would expect to continue to look at in the future, is Empower is the same type of investment on the same footing as other distribution investments or other utility investments that we make. And so having a construct that allows us to keep those on equal footing, and acknowledging, like I said earlier too, which is that the benefits are aligned along the benefits for the customer are aligned on the same type of period for which the customers are paying us back. We believe that that makes the most sense. And when you look back over the 10 years plus that we've been doing this, that fundamental construct and all of those very, very thoughtful conversations that happened, again, some of you on this call might have been very much a part of, those were very detailed, just like we're having now, very detailed conversations around how we can best develop this so that it furthers the state's policy goals, as well as benefiting the customer, and no one loses, no particular party loses. We're all working together to achieve a common goal. That fundamental construct hasn't changed. And so for that reason, we continue to believe that the 5-year amortization, the cost recovery approach, and the weighted average cost of capital return for these investments continues to hold true to this day, and we believe that it should continue to hold moving forward. Not to reiterate, I mean, we've talked about where we are in Maryland relative to the country. What absolutely sometimes blows my mind is what we're able to do together as a group of individuals furthering this effort and benefiting, like I said, our customers. When you look at our reports over the utilities reports over many years, quite literally millions of measures have been installed for the benefit of customers, millions of measures, energy efficient measures. One of the things that I used to be responsible for was the quick home energy checkup. We've done hundreds of thousands of those. You have hundreds of thousands of situations to get it right, and the vast majority of those times we've gotten it absolutely right for our customers, and benefited the state with these energy efficiency goals through this particular approach, and benefited our customers as well. The next part of our proposal is we pulled some ACEEE articles for consideration, and to prove or I guess reinforce our position. And the first one is the aligning utility business models with energy efficiency. And there were some key points that they made. One, establish specific energy efficiency savings targets, which of course we are absolutely working with everyone involved here to try to develop those specific energy efficiency targets. And I think there the takeaway is we're trying to balance very clear targets, but not have too much complexity associated with those targets, so that we all know exactly where we're headed. There were some elements in that article that we wanted to point out that we do have in Maryland, which I think is, again, these are components that have served us all well and helped for us to be successful as a collective body. The first part is program cost recovery. Second is full revenue decoupling, which disengages us from our profits are not linked to energy sales. And then performance incentives, and I'll touch on this in a minute with our proposal, but there are of course some pros and cons associated introducing those performance incentives. The next ACEEE report that we put forth for consideration and guidance was Beyond Carrots for Utilities, a national review of performance incentives for energy efficiency. And in this particular article, there were a number of incentives associated or various incentive designs that, I'm sure we could talk all day long about the various pros and cons of each of these and various complexities. And of course, we've had ACEEE on this very call talking through some of those. Won't go into a whole lot of detail, but shared net benefits is a particular approach, energy savings-based incentives, multi-factor incentives, and rate of return incentives. Interestingly enough, and we took note of this, which again gets a little bit to our concern as well, is that the ACEEE article didn't recommend penalties associated with achieving these goals. And I guess the way, or not I guess, I know the way we look at this is that you want to incentivize the utilities for achieving a goal as opposed to incentivizing the utilities to avoid a penalty. I would grow concerned, and we've talked about this in the past, this concern is that we are making program implementer decisions based on avoiding a penalty. And I guess the nature of those decisions certainly can't be held up to the nature of the decisions that can be made when we are trying to achieve a performance incentive. I think those decisions would be much more positive on behalf of the customer and policymakers and all the interested parties in Maryland. The article mentions various pros and cons, but it also talked about having demand side management be put on equal footing with supply side resources, which is what I talked about a little bit up front. So, the point there is enabling shareholders to earn a comparable financial benefit for either investment, and they're tied to specific levels of performance rather than spending. We think that too is a critical component. Now, I'm about to get into a little bit more of the PIM. We do talk about this, we do tie it to spending, but at the same time, like I said, this kind of gets us into an area where there is some concern about developing a PIM and the pros and cons associated with that. A couple of those things is that, anytime we start talking about a PIM, and we've seen some examples nationally and over the years where the stakeholders spend an inordinate amount of time determining whether there should be a penalty assessed or should be an incentive assessed. And the more complex we make this PIM, the potential for more protracted conversations and more energy being spent on those topics rather than the energy that we've spent over the years achieving the policy goals, improving energy efficiency across the state, and help us manage their energy costs. And then one of the components about a PIM as well is why not just make the utilities statutorily required to achieve this and not even use a PIM one way or the other. So rounding out the conversation or the summary around the ACEEE component and that article, they talked about cost recovery, removal of the throughput incentive, the revenue decoupling that I talked about, and the PIM. So let's talk a little bit about the PIM and what we proposed. I guess the gist of it is we know we're trying to achieve GHG abatement, so that's the goal, but simultaneously keep our eye very clearly on cost to deliver that goal. And I think we built over this decade a very transparent process, and I really applaud all of those that have been involved As we all know, we get in front of the commission on a semi-annual basis. We provide presentations to the commission in detail, and on a quarterly, well over a decade, we've delivered specific details and reports showing activities, costs, measures, a tremendous amount of transparency associated with this. And this process allows us to continue to engage with our stakeholders and make modifications along the way and make tweaks along the way as we all collectively learn how to effectively and successfully deliver these programs. So I guess to just cut to the chase on the PIM is that our proposal is the table stakes, I guess, if you will, are just to achieve the GHG abatement goal in this case. So first, achieve. So we absolutely have to achieve before we ever even think about any incentive associated with delivering these programs. So if the utilities achieve 100% of the agreed upon goal, then we can look at how much did it cost to deliver that agreed upon goal. And we can probably unpack in future conversations, if this proposal is agreed upon, specifically how we would measure. And I go back to making sure that we don't overcomplicate the measurement of this. But directionally, if we deliver at a cost lower, and we've put this tiered structure in place, and you can see it in our filing in the table that we provided. If we achieve it at 95%, then the benefit to the customer is 100%. But if we deliver at even in a more efficient manner, which of course is good for all, and that lowers the cost to collect for the programs, it increases the efficiency of the programs, then we do feel like if we develop a PIM in this particular structure, then we get to benefit, and the utility also gets to benefit. The customers, of course, get the vast majority of that benefit, but the utilities get to see a share of that, upwards of 15% of that share in this particular scenario that we've talked about. But to reiterate, we don't even have these conversations until we're delivering at least 100% of the agreed upon goal. And the last component is just, we wanted to reiterate, which I probably have done several times already, is that one of the last cost recovery PIM stakeholders.
Chris, can I get you to go back, sir? You froze after the last component, and then we didn't hear anything else.
Uh-oh.
Or at least I didn't. I don't know about anybody else. Can you just repeat that? That's great.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I was referring. I guess I was referring to the last piece of our proposal, that reiteration, which is just simply that that's another document that we provided, or another bit of support that we provided for our position when we've had previous cost recovery, and this goes back to last fall, where we reiterated some of the same points that I have today, which is that we're still faced with we're approaching some fair amount of uncertainty associated with delivering on GHG abatement, as opposed to well over a decade of megawatt hour savings. So we're still unsure, eager, but certainly unsure about how to deliver this, what levers we need to push and pull in order to deliver this. So that's kind of just a summary of what we put in the proposal, where we provided this to commission staff on September 3rd, 2021. So this wasn't a specific filing, but just rather a utility position around reiterating that we do believe in the current construct of 5-year amortization and WACC. And then if there is a PIM proposal, to be clear that it's not particularly complex, but that there are no penalties associated with it for the reasons that I shared already with the ACEEE reporting and our concerns around those penalties. And then certainly if there are incentives, to make it clear that the incentives are not enacted until we achieve at least 100% of what the agreed upon goals will be. So that's all I wanted to say on behalf of the utilities. I hope that was clear, and I'm happy to take any questions.
All right. Thank you, sir. Anybody have any questions for the utilities? Got to be somebody out there. Yes, sir. Mr. Gravatt. You're muted, sir. Mr. Gravatt. All right, we'll come back to him. Oh, you ready, sir?
Is it working now? Can you hear
It
me?
is, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. I just when I went to speak, I got a note that my mic wasn't working. How annoying. Hand goes down. Good morning, and Jim Gravatt on behalf of the Energy Efficiency Advocates. Mr. Wall, so nice to see you again. My question is, at least how, on the PIM point, one of the ways I would read that proposal, and we know that I'm a skeptic, is, let's see, here's an incentive structure that motivates the utilities to, at least to some degree, highball their budget estimates since you're setting the budgets. So therefore you can come in under and earn more money. And there's another part of it that I'm concerned about that kind of says, well, the utilities position is the best way to reduce rate impact is to pay us more money, which I struggle with a little bit on the cost issue. So I guess my question is about least cost service delivery. I mean, certainly in delivering energy, the utilities operate under this least cost service delivery obligation. I assume it's the same for the energy efficiency programs that are assumed. So are you not already doing your best to implement these programs as cost efficiently as you can? Why would you be more cost efficient if you were being rewarded for it?
So a couple of things there. One, in terms of incentivizing us to file higher costs than they might otherwise would be, so that we can earn our incentive if this particular PIM proposal is accepted. As I mentioned earlier, we've been very transparent about our filings. They are filed, as you well know, every 3 years. They are subject to the scrutiny of all the stakeholders. There are any number of ways to evaluate cost per, whatever it happens to be on any measure, cost per this, cost per that. And we have very, very productive, and historically, we've had very productive conversations about ensuring that these make sense, that to deliver these programs, we're doing it effectively and efficiently. We also regularly RFP to ensure that we are doing our best, our level best, to deliver the programs in a fashion that is most beneficial to our customers, and keeping the outstanding balance to deliver these programs, the cost recovery amount, that surcharge, as low as it possibly can be. What we're proposing, though, is certainly that's an additional focus area. It already is a focus area, but if we are incentivized to achieve an even better job of it, I think that there is potentially more conversation, more resources that could be delivered over the course of a 3-year assessment of this. Why not have even more of an incentive to deliver costs lower? Yes, we've done that, and we've demonstrated it over a decade plus of keeping costs and delivering these programs efficiently. We certainly don't know it all, that's for sure. So why wouldn't there be an opportunity over the next, like I said, a 3-year assessment, to unpack even more opportunity to deliver for the customer? And to be clear, though, it's not until we achieve the goals, not until we achieve 100% of the goals, do we even get to enjoy the potential for an incentive. the last point I'll make, I guess, is just that on a quarterly basis, we are delivering detailed costs and achievements to all stakeholders. There are plenty of check-in periods throughout to make sure that we continue to travel in a direction that all interested parties have a say in, and have certainly some level of input. Last point, I swear, last point. Even with all that, we still recognize that the utilities are given the responsibility to deliver these programs, and we take that that responsibility extremely seriously. But also, and those of you who have worked with me in the past, I get really, really excited about this. I think that there's a great stream of responsibility, coupled with a great stream of excitement to deliver these programs for our customers and see the benefit year in and year out of how we're achieving our goals for the state and for our customers.
Chris, if I may, just to your last comment, I certainly agree with your characterization of your excitement about this stuff, and I certainly no disparaging comments about you or really any of the utility staff, but I do have some views about how utilities work and what they're motivated by, and it's regulation and profit typically can drive decisions. You know, can you recall an instance, and not disparaging the transparency either, but can you recall an instance where the commission directed a utility to reduce a budget for a program while delivering the same savings because they felt the budget was too high, the cost per megawatt hour was too high?
I specifically can't, but at the same time, you know, with this transparency that I talked about before, there's always discussions. There are always discussions about not only when we're delivering a semi-annual update, but when we also go before the commission to review the surcharge amount and the impact that the surcharge amount, based on various inputs to the costs to deliver this, that there again is another scenario where we are in front of the commission, and stakeholders can certainly provide input as to how effective we are delivering these programs. And just lastly too, you and I go way back. I've never ever considered any of your comments ever being disparaging towards the utilities. You know, we all work together quite well.
Good, thanks for that. Okay, thanks, Chris. I'll stop now and let other people talk.
All right, thank you. Dan.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Dan Hurley with Commission staff. Chris, I just have a couple of questions. My first one is on the 5-year amortization structure that, you know, was put into play back in 2008. I was part of that work group. So, but you know, as I recall, that was more about kind of having newer programs that were going to have a majority of early year costs before the savings would catch up to the cost. You know, we're 14, 10, 12, 13 years in now, and more of a mature program. The commission has taken, smaller steps towards the 5-year amortization, with the behavioral programs now being expensed and the utility administrative costs now being expensed. Do you think there's any kind of differential between a newer startup Empower versus a mature Empower as far as trying to adjust that amortization period?
I guess yes and no. Like I mentioned before, going with GHG abatement, we know and expect certainly that could embark us on a whole new series of programs, which would have potential for startups, just like we had back in 2008. So that could certainly lend itself once again to kind of dust off the same arguments of we're trying to minimize the impact to our customers while we embark in this case on a brand new goal with brand new potential. Like I keep saying, I don't want to overemphasize it, but brand new levers. So you could have a stream of programs that are the existing programs, but potentially you could have a stream of brand new programs that would have startup costs unto themselves. And you know, we're right back to 5-year amortization seems to make most sense because it's that very, very delicate balance between front loading costs to our customers and having the surcharge be very, very high, even for a short period of time, versus having a situation where we push out the cost so far that, let's say, one day when we do redirect our efforts outside of Empower, and then you're faced with customers continuing to pay for programs that they can't even avail themselves of at that point.
Okay. My second question is along the similar lines, but it seems the proposal doesn't really address the commission's concerns with the unamortized balance and I guess other parties' concerns with the utility return on the investment for Empower. So I was wondering if you could address the thoughts there. It doesn't seem to be, you know, we're still holding this 5 years, so we're going to pay them off every 5 years. Utilities going to earn their whack. Oh, and on top of that, if we hit our goal and have savings, we get some more. So I don't see how, it doesn't seem like we're addressing that potential growth of the unamortized balance and utility return.
Yeah, the component in our proposal that we believe does that effectively is to ensure that the costs of the programs or the delivery of the programs is lower than it would otherwise be. If a PIM is accepted under our proposal, we would deliver these programs at a lower cost than what we originally filed. There would be more focus on that, as I mentioned before. You know, there's the potential for, and you know, we don't know what we don't know, but to continue to reiterate and reinforce how important it is to efficiently deliver these programs for our customers. So, you know, we're delivering Maryland's policy goals for the betterment of our customers, but very much focusing on doing it efficiently and effectively at every turn, similar to what we're doing now, certainly, but at the same time, in this case, we now have an opportunity to be incentivized for even more focus on that.
All right. Thanks, Chris. That's all I have for now, Chuck. Thank you.
Mr. Oliver. Welcome, sir.
Good morning. A couple questions. First,
Mr. Oliver, before you jump in, can I just get you to tell everyone where you're from?
Oh, sorry.
No problem, sir.
Bruce Oliver, representing the Apartment and Office Building Association, AOBA. The first question is, doesn't the structure that you've proposed regarding providing incentives for lowering costs actually create an incentive for the utility to generously estimate the cost that it would incur to accomplish a given target?
So that's what I had addressed a little bit earlier. Given the transparency of how we file every 3 years and how we report quarterly and deliver a detailed report to the commission and other stakeholders semi-annually, my belief is, on behalf of the utilities, is that there's a great deal of transparency associated with that process. In particular, it takes us about a year to the next 3-year proposal. And along the way, when we file that, ultimately, and leading up to that, there are opportunities for stakeholders to review what it is we're filing and review on any particular key performance indicator that they want to develop or we share with them. Are we legitimate? Are we transparent in how we are filing for expense to deliver these programs? So, you know, I think that there's a tremendous amount of transparency, and there always has been a tremendous amount of transparency in this process to the betterment of the overall Empower Maryland programs and the way we all work together. So I think that keeps us from increasing costs just so we can meet the incentive. And to reiterate my earlier point too, is we don't even get that incentive until we achieve 100% of the agreed upon goal.
Yeah. I'm not sure that transparency equals effective cost estimation, but my next question is it presumed in your presentation that there will be an a priori demonstration that the dollar value of the benefits to ratepayers will exceed the costs, the estimated costs?
You're going to have to define a priori. Is that the word that you used?
Yes, that's an economics term. Beforehand, before you start into the process.
So ask your question again. I'm sorry. I'm not. I want to be responsive to your question.
All right. As we start into the process, before you expend any dollars, is there a presumption that the utility will demonstrate? I'm sorry. Is there a presumption that the utility will demonstrate that the value to ratepayers, the value of the benefits to ratepayers in dollar terms will be greater than the costs that the utility estimates it will incur?
If I understand your question, I think we're going to be demonstrating that throughout the 3-year period. So a filing clearly will, in theory, model out to deliver that. We'll have specific participation goals, specific expense line items, very clearly laid out as to what it will take to achieve these specific participation goals, which ultimately rolls up into, in this case, a GHG abatement goal. So it'll be a well-rounded, as it has been, a well-rounded portfolio covering opportunities for all of our customers to participate in these programs. But again, if I understand your question, certainly that will model out, but you know, we have to deliver. That's part of the comment I made before about the responsibility and how seriously the utilities take implementing these programs, so that we can ensure our customers are extremely satisfied and you know, stakeholders are satisfied and the commission is satisfied, and they continue to give us opportunities to do this again and again and again, now well over a decade.
Well, I appreciate your response, but I didn't hear anything in that addressed the estimation of the dollar value of the benefits and comparison of that dollar value in a benefit cost analysis before we head into the process.
Well, as you might recall, when we file for 3 years, we always have costs that are modeled in our filings. That's part of our requirement. So the portfolio, as has been in the past, you know, the sub portfolios for commercial and industrial customers and the sub portfolio for residential has to model out, given the current assumptions that are made, again, transparently, with a lot of the folks on the phone here, where we, you know, regularly evaluate each of the programs. All of that and the underlying assumptions will be provided. They continue. They've been provided over every 3-year cycle, where you can see this program is modeled out, or the sub portfolio is modeled out to achieve greater than 1. So the benefits are greater than the expense. And then it's our responsibility to follow through on that. And, you know, that's sort of this cycle that I like to refer to as the cycle of constantly design, implement, and then evaluate. And then that evaluation in turn changes, allows you to modify the design of the program and the delivery of the program so that we are, ultimately achieving a whole myriad of goals, not the least of which is a positive cost benefit. So again, I hope I addressed it with that.
So if I understand you, you are saying that you will demonstrate a benefit cost ratio of greater than 1 for the program before you start into it.
Well, I'm just hung up a little bit on your word of demonstrate. We would model, as we've always done, you model the cost benefit analysis at that point in time in which you file the programs. And that cost benefit analysis has all of the associated assumptions that support that cost benefit analysis that is, one, transparent, and two, developed in similar subgroups that involve the evaluators, and they have input. We all agree to that, so that going in, we're demonstrating the benefit of these programs, eyes wide open, and then that process of reinforcing, did the cost benefit the way you modeled it, did it turn out to be that case in practice? Yes or no? And it's usually not a simple yes or no. Often it's yes, but, or no, but. And then we set about making modifications to the programs or evaluating the programs in a way that we continue to be held to account where benefits are greater than cost year after year after year.
Just one more question on this line. That's that the way I hear what you're saying is you will estimate benefits and costs at the beginning of the program. And then if the costs come in less than estimated, the utility will receive an incentive. But there's nothing about the assessing the potential that the benefits come in something other than expected, maybe less than expected.
Yeah, and I think I guess I alluded to this a little bit earlier. Our PIM proposal is just that, a proposal. If in concept that PIM proposal with achieving 100% of the the GHG abatement goal, and then we get to benefit if we deliver on less costs, we can certainly in these subsequent conversations say, okay, we're all collectively as a group in agreement with that model, with that construct. So let's now hang a bit more detail on how we would assess a benefit and how we would assess the cost, so that we can, because it's not just as simple as, I don't know, it's probably dangerous for me to make it this simple, but it's not just as simple as saying we're going to spend 100,000 and instead we only spent 90,000, so therefore the customer gets the benefit from 10,000. We would show the net benefit of the program, and that could be done on a probably several different methods.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. And I actually appreciate your easy $100,000 example, Chris. So, Dylan, you had your hand up, sir.
And that's from my brain, trust me.
Good morning, everybody. Again, I'm Dylan Voorhees with VEIC, working with OPC. Couple questions, Mr. Walls. I think sort of following up a little bit on some of the questions before, but I don't have the table right in front of me, and won't ask you to do math here, but can you tell me, so the idea is at 95% of budget or below that, that's when the PIM kicks in. Is that correct? And right?
That's one tier. That's the first tier. And in
Okay.
fact, if we do 95% or below, an incentive for the utility would not, yes, from 100% to 95%, we would not see, the utility would not see a benefit.
Yeah.
Until we hit 95% or at some level below that, that's when, as it's proposed now, that's when our PIM would be enacted.
And what percentage, what is that tier? What's that next tier between what and 95%?
Sure. So the first tier is 85 to 95%. Customers benefit 90%, and the utility benefits 10%.
Yeah.
And then the third tier is anything less than 85%.
Yeah.
The customer gets 85%, and we get the difference of 15%.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. So, I was just trying to pull up quickly the budgets and expenditures for the last cycle, and pulled up BG&E's last semi-annual. And it looks like, and I mean, I think this is consistent with our findings looking across the utility programs on an ongoing basis for a very long time. That's been doing that for OPC, that the utilities are actually typically under budget for their programs. And it looks like in the 2018 to 2020 cycle, BG&E's total budget for EE and DR was about 507 or so million, and your actual expenditures were 423 million, which, I think that's pretty good news for ratepayers. That's 83%. And so if that PIM had been in effect at that time and those had been the outcomes, then you would calculate 15% of that savings amount, which is 80 something million dollars or something like that, and that would be the award. Am I following that right?
No, not specifically.
Okay.
And I might call on some of my utility peers to jump in and unpack this a little bit more, who had more involvement in the details of that. It's not just a straight dollar value.
Okay.
And as they're thinking about what they would say with this and respond to this too, is, this is part of the, I guess, the concern that we even had delivering on a PIM. I'll reiterate, the commission and stakeholders have talked about PIMs and the importance of PIMs, and these are some of the issues that we also struggle with, is that we have demonstrated year in and year out delivering efficiently on these programs. So is a PIM necessary? We could address a PIM and have a PIM and certainly at the same time, just the concept of PIM comes with it the potential for greater complexity, lots of conversations about whether and lots of time, mind share spent on whether we met it or not. It's certainly, as we all know, pros and cons associated with these.
Okay, so I don't know if there's somebody else to jump in, if there's, just on my question, and we can take it offline or give an example. It might be helpful to do what I was trying to do really quickly, which is do a scenario, or if this had been in effect in the last period, what would that have looked like? That could be really useful. To my eyes, it looks like spending was about 83% of budget, which results in $84 million of savings. What did happen is that ratepayers just, quote, kept that, or didn't expend that, so they kept it. So I'm trying to figure out what percentage, how that math would work if it's not just 15% of that savings amount. What is it? So we can come back to that or if somebody else wants to comment. And I guess I have another question.
Yeah, and let me just follow up on that just quickly. It's just, while I think that would be a good exercise, I just reiterate that we're placing an idea or a concept over top of something that wasn't in existence previously, and assuming that potentially, and I'm not suggesting you would do this, but just to be eyes wide open and very clear, we're placing this idea of a PIM over a time frame that there was no PIM.
Yep.
And so we have to be very, very careful about any conclusions we make associated with, well, if we had had the PIM, then this would have happened. And that may or may not have necessarily been the case. It again goes back to the, another layer of concern about the complexity of adding this component to our effort.
I hear that caution, and that is there's the pros and cons of having a PIM. I mean, in terms of a backward look, one would imagine that if the PIM was doing what it was supposed to, that the cost would be even lower than they otherwise would be. I mean, that's kind of the premise, is that it does create a financial incentive on the utility to sort of squeeze costs down even further. So that would presumably, hopefully, be the direction that would go in. But I understand that caution about any sort of back casting.
Dylan, could I jump in? And just to kind of piggyback on what Dylan's saying, if, again, based on his scenario, and I know it's not necessarily, an apples to apples comparison here, but if you, in theory, if you saved $80+ million over the last cycle, I mean, are you setting the percentages in your PIM? Are they too low? Is this already an easy get for you in terms of an incentive for the utility?
Yeah, I mean, in theory, it's hard to respond to that, but I guess I'll respond in theory is that, again, I reiterate, we're going to be transparent about this. If this PIM construct is accepted, then we would develop something that all parties understand how it would, what the point where it would be enacted. And I still go back to, though, that, to be very clear, we have to achieve 100% of the energy savings, GHG abatement. We're not even there as a group yet as to what that specifically would be. So we have to get there first, and then we can add this component to it on, well, what if we had done a little bit even better and done it at a lower cost? Just not to reiterate too much, but just COVID, no one expected COVID to happen. That's a critical element that certainly could have impacted, it certainly did impact the last 3 years, or it's impacting the last couple of years, I should say. That, while we hope that never comes back, that could be used as an example of just some of the uncertainty associated with market conditions and how customers respond to these programs and what's happening, market share, the overall place where the life cycle of these of the measures, the life cycle of these programs, all those elements, it's very complex that would be put forth in order for us to be comfortable first to say we can achieve 100% and then ultimately try to strive for the PIM. And you would no doubt see that, certainly stakeholders would see that. You're going to see that probably about let's say we assess this PIM over 3 years, you're going to start seeing directionally where we're headed with this, probably by the end of year 1, where you'll have 2 semi-annuals that you'll have an opportunity to provide input and question the utilities. And you'll have the quarterly reports to provide additional insights for you. So, I see this as very much an effort that is clear, and you begin to see how successful the utilities are being moving forward. It should not be a surprise to anyone.
All right, thank you, sir. Sorry to jump in, Dylan.
No, that's very helpful, Your Honor. Thank you. I guess the other question I want to ask are questions a little bit of following up on unamortized balance a little bit on some of Dan's questions. So my understanding is that the proposal doesn't have a specific pay down mechanism to it, but your approach to that is let's try to squeeze down costs a little bit more by giving an incentive to do that, and that would have a beneficial effect on the balance over time. Have you, correct me if I'm wrong if characterizing that, but that's kind of what I understood. Have you or could you model in any way what that might look like for the balance over time if it was sort of reasonably successful? And yeah, so I guess that's my question. Well, what if the commission was saying, well, what is this going to do to the balance? Because I think that this commission has said very clearly, multiple times we're sort of concerned about this balance and we want solutions on the balance. Can you model or characterize what the impact on the balance would be under this proposal?
So that's a commitment I certainly can't make here, but I can certainly bring that back to the utilities. If any utility representative wants to provide some insight right now, I would ask them to do so. But that's certainly something that we could take back and see how we might do that. If I've learned anything, there's a lot of complexity in doing something like that. We would want to be clear on any assumptions and clear with the outcome as well. But I certainly respect and understand the point of your question. That's for sure.
Do you know off the top of your head what BG&E's unamortized balance is these days? A lot of us really gained a lot of insight from the report that MEA did. It's probably now a year and a half ago, actually. But last I knew at that time, and that might have been 6-month-old data. It could have been 2 years old data. The BG&E's balance was about 130 million. Do you or somebody else know? Is that approximately what it still is? Has it gone down? I mean, it would have gone up or down a little bit, but materially up or down? Do you know that?
I'm sorry. No, I don't know. I don't have the figure off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
Okay.
That's, again, something that we could get back to you. And I would assume as part of this exercise, that would be obviously taken into account and provided.
Okay. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir. All right. Anybody else want to weigh in on utilities proposal? You're out here on an island. They're leaving you by yourself today, sir. Mr. Shaw.
Yeah, good morning. Jeff Shaw here from SMECO. Just wanted to interject a little bit and give Chris some time to breathe and maybe take a drink. But from SMECO's perspective as a cooperative, we are not looking or signing on to doing a PIMS. Just the financial makeup of the cooperative, we're not looking to do a PIMS. So just wanted to get that out there before the group. We're not looking to take money from the membership only to return it to the membership, because that would be our financial structure. We don't have a shareholder to look for. So, Dylan, we're intrigued by what the Office of People's Counsel has put together. I would request that maybe share your worksheets that sit behind your calculations. We've spoken here internally, and again, we're intrigued. And to follow up on your earlier question, SMECO's balance sits at about just under 30 million for us. So
Thank you very much, Jeff, and I'm happy to follow up with more details.
Perfect. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Mr. Shaw. Anybody else want to weigh in? They like the utilities proposal, not like it? Any more questions? All right. Thank you very much for your time today, Mr. Walls. I really appreciate it and answering everyone's questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Why don't we go to OPC next?
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning. Dylan is going to present, if you'll allow it, just a PowerPoint of our proposal.
Sure, absolutely. If we can figure it out. All right. All right. You should be able to do it, Dylan.
Okay, let's see. Present now. Tab. And down.
We got it.
Okay. Well, the first thing I note is that I've moved us backward 364 days on the calendar, so really botched that. Let's go forward from there. So let me just want to summarize what OPC has put together. So this is kind of a summary of the challenge or the problem statement, and sort of summary of the approach. So starting first of all, recognizing really strong past achievement of savings as we've measured them, annual electric savings. However, OPC believes the cost that ratepayers are paying the utilities to achieve that is too high, and I'll come back to that. A little bit to the point that Dan was making earlier, empowers a mature program that no longer requires amortization. Especially when it's resulting in costs that are higher than what we see are being paid in other strong performing jurisdictions. Not having a performance basis to how much the program administrators earn is not a best practice. And the challenge that these two things together result in is the very high costs that ratepayers are paying in returns on the balance does not leave room to add performance payments on top, in OPC's view. This moment is a good moment. There was a reference earlier to the structure being in place since 2008. These types of decisions can be very long lasting. The reauthorization of Empower and a new goal structure, that's the right time to realign cost recovery to be more affordable and fair and performance-based. And so OPC's proposal is based on this idea that paying down the balance is critical. And that then makes room for a fair, sustainable performance-based earnings for the utilities. Let's see. I'm not going to go through all of these principles, but they're in the written document as well. But we tried to start with a set of principles and ideas, and then design something toward that. And these include, this is the simple principle that earnings should be performance-based. They should be based on the desired outcomes, and also that targets need to be ambitious yet achievable. We're not having a conversation now about what the numeric targets are going to be, and also that we should look around, and the earnings that other program administrators are earning in other jurisdictions is a relevant benchmark for what Maryland ratepayers should pay.
Hey, Dylan, you got a question, sir.
Sure.
Mr. Lawson?
Oh, sorry. And I can wait until the end. I just wanted to get myself in the queue. If this isn't
All right, you're first in line, sir.
Okay.
okay. So just a question, and for my education, we're focusing on utility earnings being higher than peer utilities. I mean, have you found that the overall cost of delivering the savings for Maryland utilities is higher than these peer utilities?
Well, let me give you the data that we did look at. It depends a little bit on whether you include the cost of the earnings in those estimates. So, in fact, for example, you may be familiar with ACEEE and others do look at the cost of earnings and try to do it in a comparative basis. Typically, don't include the utilities earnings on, say, the unamortized balance. So we would need to go back and look at that. But I don't think the focus was on the cost of the programs. That's important. We see the utilities underspending and achieving. So that's less the concern than what the utilities are
So I guess I have a follow-up question then. I mean,
Yeah.
shouldn't that be more important, right? I mean, the overall cost to the customer, not, I mean, from my perspective, if I'm a customer, I don't care who I'm paying. I want to pay less overall, right? I mean, if, it doesn't matter if it's going to the utility or elsewhere if I'm a customer. I don't care.
So I don't have that data on hand. We can look at that data. What we looked at is utility earnings compared to program budgets. And I don't really have reason to believe that the cost to acquire savings in Maryland is substantially different from other peer states. And by peer states, we did look at those states that are relatively high on ACEEE's annual scorecard. So we looked at the top 18 states. Some of those, a couple of those had data was not available. One or two have governmental program administrators. So like DHCD, they don't earn anything from their programs. But we looked at what is the program administrator, whether they are a third party, which is true in a couple of these cases, or a utility. What are they earning as a percentage of the program budgets? That is not the formula that is used to determine earnings in Maryland or in some other places. But as a benchmark, how much are the utilities earning as a percentage of program budgets? And this finding was cause for concern, adding to concern that OPC and others have expressed about the cost of this balance, because that is the primary driver for why these costs are so high, are these accumulated unamortized balances.
All right, John, I'm sorry. So were you
Sure.
done?
Maybe just finish explaining this.
Sure. I'm sorry.
A little bit. So down along the bottom, you see the different states. Those are their rankings on ACEEE's scorecard. In some of them, there's a name of a third-party administrator, and in some of them, it's a utility. There's obviously multiple utilities in a lot of those states, but we picked sort of a big one or a representative utility. And the data comes from a variety of sources, filings in other states, third-party plans. The data from Maryland for this and a lot of the analysis that we did, and I can summarize here today, just come from the analysis that was done on behalf of MEA in that report from late 2020. So that's where that information on the balance comes from. It may be a year or two old. It may actually be higher, but that's where that data comes from. Looks like there's October 2020. So that's extremely useful. I'm happy to take questions on this, Your Honor, then go back to our proposal.
Okay. April.
Hi, April O'Neill from BGE. For the states that are listed, are they amortizing any expense, or is this an expensing model? Do you know offhand?
I do, and I have a slide that summarizes that. Most states use an expensing model. I believe at least 3 of these use an amortizing model. Those would be New Jersey, New York, Illinois, I think, off the top of my head. So there's both states that amortize and most states that are sort of top states use an expensing model. So we have a mix here of third-party and utility administrators, a mix of expense, mostly expensing, and some amortization, and a mix of different forms of earnings. So all of these except for Maryland have performance-based earnings. Some of them use a PIM. A couple of them use an adjusted rate of return. And I have a slide, and I think next slide summarizes that.
And then one follow-up question. And the earnings as a percentage, is that like an annual basis, or that's over the program cycle? So that would be like
Yeah, thank you,
years.
April. Sorry, that we picked 1 year. So those are they may be 2020 in some cases, 2021 in other cases, the most recent year that we can find reliable data on.
Okay, thanks.
Dan,
Thanks. Dan Hurley with Christian Staff. Hey, Dylan, is this across all customer classes, or is it residential, or is it a combination of commercial and residential?
It should be all classes combined. So these are the kind of 4 things OPC is proposing. I mean, obviously relate to each other, but it's just to help break it down. So the first proposal is pay down the balance. We looked at approximately 10 years. Again, made use of the analysis of what that pay down looked like coming from the MEA analysis, and use the surcharge to cover program costs on an expense basis. So I'm not sure how the utilities are actually funding and the cost of Empower right now, but we do know that the collection on the surcharge amount is more than enough to cover the program expenses at this point. Empower is costing about $300 million. That's its sort of total program budget across utilities. There's enough collection, in fact, more than enough to cover that on an expensing basis. So I'll come back to paying down the balance, but that's a critical component here.
okay.
I see a hand. If I could just get through so number 2, establish a performance metric. And we would propose nothing really complex, 3 components. We heard from Mr. Nadal from ACEEE when he was here with us. Multi-factor performance incentives is common among leading states. We think 3 factors is the right mix. I'll come back to those: a greenhouse gas, an energy savings, and a low income component. And then allow the utilities to earn a performance award based on achievement of goals along those metrics. And the size of that award value would go up over time as the balance was paid down. And finally, to adjust the rate of return during that pay down period using those same performance metrics and relation and achievement of goal to adjust the performance metric. And we would the proposal that was sent around would set that rate of return plus performance award would allow the utilities to earn the equivalent of the weighted average cost of capital during that pay down period if they achieved 100% of the goals. So if you did a pay down and you just left their rate of return as it is, this proposal would give the same total earnings to the utility through these 2 components, assuming they achieved 100% of the goals. And I've got a couple charts that are in the filing I can pull up on the screen to help with that. But let me pause there for that question from Chris or others.
Yes, thank you. This is Chris Walls with BGE. And Dylan, having just finished this, I very much appreciate the fact that you want to try to keep your train of thought going before you start answering questions.
No, that's okay.
I'm actually happy, of course, too, to wait until the end to ask any follow-up questions. But I just wanted to touch on number 1. Can you elaborate on the transition of the 10 years? And I guess before you answer that too, just quickly, I'll reiterate what Jeff from SMECO was saying, is we too were certainly intrigued by this, and to reiterate too, if you could provide all of the detailed assumptions and even down to the spreadsheets, it would be really helpful for us to unpack and fully understand the proposal and the details of the proposal. And you might likely get to some of that anyway, but just my specific question at this point is, can you just elaborate on if you're proposing some type of transition for that 10-year period and exactly how you see that working? Thank you.
Sure. So we still, I mean, it's a fairly fleshed out concept, but it's still, and we did run a bunch of numbers, or we used the MEA analysis to illustrate how this could work. But we did not get to that level of detail of sort of what would be the mechanic. I believe all of this data that's on the screen right now comes from that MEA report. It's in different scenarios, so it's kind of all put together in one place. But they did model out how the amortization, what the program expenses would be, and they modeled a straight line flat budget for 10 years as simplifying sort of assumption, and sort of what the amortization would be and what would happen to the balance, how you'd cover the program costs. And so that's really the what we use to illustrate these. And of course, what that cost depends on the rate of return. And so that's what that data looks like. But in terms of the details of the mechanics, that's not something that we've sort of gotten to. I guess we don't need to say a lot more about this, but this is the proposed sort of 3-part metrics that we put on the table. Total lifetime GHG savings, that's sort of the core metric, core goal of the program. But also think it's useful to have a PIM that reflects the importance of incentivizing utilities that sell electricity and gas to continue to focus on saving those fuels, and then a smaller weighting for limited income savings. And what we've proposed, and there's more explanation in the comments, but is an incentive to the utilities to support achievement of limited income households in excess of a goal, presuming that there is a goal assigned to DHCD, that they have a savings target, and for performance, beyond that the utilities can contribute to would be a financial award, or a portion of the financial award associated with that. I think I skipped over this just quickly, and we can send this around. But these are the top 18 states. These are the type of performance of program administrator type. So mostly utility, couple third party, couple of governmental. Obviously, the governmental, they don't have earnings. Almost every state has a performance-based earnings, except for Maryland and Washington. And a PIM proposal is the most common, but ROR stands for rate of return. So an adjustment to the rate of return is also used. Again, this is pretty similar to what ACEEE presented. So this is just sort of paying down the balance. I think covered that. The performance award, just to explain this, so the idea is that as you're paying down the balance, the earnings that the utilities are receiving is going down, which makes more room, if you will, for ratepayers to pay a performance award. As we said, right now, just paying too much. It's out of line. It's not really affordable or fair. But as that is paid down, it creates more room to phase in a performance award. And so the idea is that it would phase in over that pay down period. At the end, OPC is proposing a PEM worth 3% of program costs for achieving 100% of goals. So if you achieve 100% of goals on these metrics, there's a performance award of 3% of the program cost. That would be scaled up or down depending on achievement of goal. So starting at 75% of goal, you could achieve 75% of that amount, up to 125% of goal, 125% of that amount. Those bands are used in a wide variety of states. That sort of 75 to 125. Here's what you earn in the middle, and then you sort of straight line it. Create an opportunity for the utility to perform. This is what, and so, and furthermore, the proposal is to adjust the rate of return using exactly the same metric. So if the utility is achieving the goal of 100%, the rate of return would be 7%. And this would be their return on that balance as it goes down. If they are achieving less than that or more than that, you adjust the rate of return. So what the utility receives is a combination of these two components. And this shows the total performance-based earnings, the return plus that award, if they achieve 100% of goal or 75% of goal or 125% of goal. And to the point that I was starting with, these returns, or they're not returns, they're returns plus the performance award, would be this very much the same as if you paid down the balance at the weighted average cost of capital. So OPC has previously proposed a substantial reduction in the rate of return to pay down this balance. The commission and other parties have taken positions on that. This proposal would give the utilities the equivalent of the weighted average cost of capital, but it would have two components to it, and they would have to achieve the goal. If they achieved only 75% of the goal, there would be less earnings. That's just an illustration of the size of these two things. So in the early years, the return on the balance dominates the utility's return, but over time, this amount grows. And importantly, at the end of this period, if you pay down the balance, you can, under expensing, the utilities don't earn anything. And so instead, this would result in a sort of long-term situation where the utilities would have an opportunity to earn on Empower. Finally, looking at the surcharge impacts of paying down the balance and this proposal. Again, this information is coming from and supported by the analysis done in that MEA report. So this is showing, and the gray line is kind of status quo. Leave the balance as is, assume the program costs continue, and of course you don't get to pay down the balance that way. The paying down the balance requires an increase in the surcharge for a certain period of time in order to get to a lower surcharge and a lower cost thereafter. So at the end of this pay down, the surcharge would be lower. And it's important to acknowledge ratepayers also wouldn't owe the utilities close to $1 billion. So there's a clear, even though the surcharge is a little bit lower, there's a substantial difference between these two lines, which is whether or not you owe somebody $1 billion or $800 or $900 million. So I think that's the end. Thank you, Your Honor, and everybody for letting me walk through that time and taking the time to do that. I'll just leave my slides up in case anybody wants to look at any of them, but happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, sir. Anybody have questions? Yes, Chris.
Thank you, Judge McLean. Just a couple of questions, Dylan. And again, thank you for the presentation. Slide 8. Just curious on that particular slide. At this point, the future programming work group is very much focused on GHG, and I'm just curious, this proposal of roughly, balancing out or weighting lifetime GHG in addition to lifetime electricity gas savings, in addition to DHCD limited income weighting. Is OPC sort of modifying their position that it's not solely focused on GHG savings, but rather you're introducing now more of a weighting?
Thanks, Chris, for that question. Couple of things. First of all, these obviously are ranges, and I think subject to good opportunity for discussion. Secondly, no, OPC is not changing its position that the goal structure for the program would be what we've discussed in the past. This is a related but distinct question on how should the utilities be financially compensated, or how should the utilities earn. And I think those are related but distinct questions. In the comments that you summarized and were in the filing, you spend a lot of time talking about some of the principles from ACEEE on some of these questions. And one of the things that you'll find if you kind of read through the ACEEE reports is that it is important to think about the natural financial incentives that utilities have, and put more emphasis on using a financial incentive in areas that push against the utilities' sort of inherent financial interests, as opposed to needing to spend a lot of money to push in the direction that they already want to go in. For example, more electricity sales through electrification. So the concept here is to try to maintain a balanced financial incentive to the utility. Yes, going after GHG reductions, and maybe that number should be higher, or you could adjust any of these, but also wanting to maintain some incentive for, say, the electric utility to help achieve electric efficiency savings at the same time, because that is not in their natural financial interest. So that's the theory behind that proposal.
Thank you for that. And one key takeaway that I heard from your response too is just that these could be subject to adjustment, which and you clarified that OPC hasn't moved away specifically from GHG abatement.
Yep.
So thank you for that. Just a couple more quick questions. Let's see, slide 10. Just curious, and given you had already said that you had pulled this from MEA, so you may or may not know, but do you know if the rate of return is pre-tax or post-tax under this proposal?
I will say that they have taken taxes into consideration. I don't know if Babatunde, how familiar he is with that. I'd have to open it back up, but I believe those numbers are pre-tax, but I do know that they've taken taxes into consideration for these.
Okay, and that could be revealed too in the detailed spreadsheets as well. That analysis. I think. Okay, I think it's one last. It's slide 13.
Yeah, as I'm going on, Chris. So I didn't try to recreate any of those numbers. I took from MEA. If you keep the weighted average cost of capital. So this is all of Empower. So this isn't individual utilities. This is the sum of all of the utilities. I think it's probably a weighted average, if that's a weighted average cost of capital for all of the utilities. So we did not attempt to recreate any of the math behind these. We took these scenarios from MEA, which had hired Oculus, and I think their report does explain, what they've done in pretty good detail. So that's where you're going to have to go to find that level of detail. How do you, if you amortize 389 and your program cost is 300 million, what's the cost of the return going to be? We didn't recreate that. We just built off of that. So hopefully that's helpful, and so you're not underwhelmed when you see any spreadsheets that we share. But that report has it all in it. So you had a question about this one, I think.
Yes, and thank you for that response. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
This question, I think someone asked it, or you might have touched on. I just want to clarify this surcharge analysis, and two, like you said, this might be in the details of the MEA proposal. It's a blended rate across all rates,
Yes.
customer classes, I should say. This
Yep.
is not specific to residential or specific to C&I or whatever, right?
That's correct. Yeah, it is. It's all Empower across all utilities, all customer classes. That's right.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. All right, that was it.
Yeah, and obviously, if there's interest in this proposal by the work group, there's any number of possible sort of getting a little bit deeper. What does this look like for different utilities? What does this look like for different ratepayer classes? That would, I think, how much that effort is warranted depends a little bit on, I don't know. It depends a little bit on what OPC directs me to do, but that may depend a little bit on, what the appetite of the group is for moving forward to dive deeper into this.
Great. Thank you, Judge McLean.
Thank you, sir. Dylan, can I ask you a quick question on the 75%, I guess kind of the low end award? Why would we be, what's the thought for giving the utilities for, getting a good solid C rather than kind of acing the test?
That's a great question. That's a great question, Your Honor. I think certainly that's subject to more conversation. There's a couple of reasons why many states, I can think of at least half a dozen that use that range. And I was part of a process in one state not long ago where there was a lot of haggling between the utilities and the commission staff and others about whether that should be 65% or 70% or 75%. That's important. The actual level of ambition of the goal is probably more important. So you can manipulate either of those numbers. And I think that allowing the utility to earn something, and again, ultimately, this would be the only mechanism for the utilities to earn. There would be no balance, no borrowing at all. So it's really just this performance award. If you only allow the utility to earn for hitting 100%, it creates a lot of pressure to push down that goal. And what we want is ambitious but achievable. That sounds nice, and it takes a lot of work to figure that out. But you really do want to set that target at an ambitious level. And so allowing the utility to earn something below that for achieving 80%, say, is fair if the other things line up. The other consideration is, and so this proposal is that the utilities would earn 0 at 74% and then something at 75%. You can do really complicated math, but it's really, you're going to have a cliff there, right? And so better set that down a ways where you're hopefully pretty confident you're not going to achieve that, and then you have a smoother line. And again, hopefully they're not at 75, hopefully they're over 80, they're in the B range, but you haven't created some artificial line, at which case the incentives just get whacked out, and then you start to distort behavior. So I think that's why a lot of jurisdictions do pick a number that maybe sounds a little bit low, but the idea is 100% is a reach. It's tough. It's not an easy automatic get, but you also have created a smoother path, so you haven't created sort of distorted behavioral incentives.
All right, thank you. That makes sense. Dan.
Thank you, Dan Hurley with Commission staff. Thanks, Dylan. I do appreciate the presentation. It is I think it's a very interesting proposal to look at. So a couple questions. Let's assume, I know it's a big stretch here possibly. Let's assume this gets proposed as a consensus recommendation. The commission accepts it and we start this in say 2024 for the next program cycle. So the proposal is to take whatever the outstanding unamortized balance is, put that in its own, it's called a bucket. Over 10 years, we're going to pay that off through the surcharge. Is that still earning the weighted average cost of capital over the 10 years?
I believe so. I believe that is how it was modeled in the MEA analysis, is that it would each year that you're paying a return on that balance, and it's getting lower because the balance is going down, but you are paying interest on it over time. I believe that's the case.
Okay. And then starting 2024 with the 2024 program costs, are we looking at expensing those costs starting in 2024? Is it a 5-year amortization, a 3-year amortization? I know there's some kind of combination of what they're earning on the old unamortized portion versus what they might be able to earn on the, let's call it the newer program costs.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of different ways you can do it. And I don't think that OPC has a specific preferred proposal that they're articulating at this time for which way it should work. And because I don't think we've unpacked what those would look, how those would be different from a ratepayer perspective. So I think that would bear some more analysis. I think if you are going to sort of keep paying that interest on that balance, and that's sort of presumed to be the case, to me, it would make sense to stop borrowing as quickly as possible, sort of new borrowing. And I think it might come out to be half a dozen of one and 6 of another if you sort of think of yourself as continuing to borrow some. You may be paying less interest on previous amounts versus just cutting it off, expensing. We're going forward. We're not borrowing anymore, but you now have a sort of you don't have that rolling amortization anymore to sort of reduce the time at which you've borrowed any $1. So I don't know how that would look like. I think it would be interesting, and I'm curious if anyone has different views on which of those would be better or some version.
Okay, because I guess one concern, although I understand that 10 years is helping spread out the surcharge impact on customers. Under the current construct where we're paying off program years every 5 years, we're going to have some of that unamortized balance that's going to be spread out 10 years. A few program years in there where those are going to be paid off in a couple years anyways. And now we're kind of taking that dollar value that was going to be paid off in 2 years and then we're sending it out to 10. So I mean, time money being what it is, but we're paying more over time, but we're having a smaller surcharge impact. So I guess it's that balancing act that we're trying to find that sweet spot where surcharge impact versus long-term cost versus cost recovery.
Well, that's certainly correct, I think, in terms of finding that balance. In terms of which is the larger cost to ratepayers, put all of that balance in an account and just be paying all those interest for 10 years. I mean, yeah, you're now paying a bunch of interest over 10 years on that balance, but you're not borrowing anything more, versus a more blended approach where you're sort of keeping that 5-year amortization, but you're trying to also shrink that balance down. Now, as you get to the end, at some point you got to just suck it up and sort of pay off that balance. And so both of them result in paying a lot of interest over 10 years, I think. I don't know which would be better from a ratepayer perspective. And a shorter, I think it also was in the comments, we used 10 years in part because it felt like the right balance, in part because MEA had conveniently done a lot of analysis over that time period. If you're going to use a 3-year program cycle, maybe it's 9 years, or maybe it's 6 years. And I think those are either of those are, worth considering.
Okay, I guess thanks, Dylan. And this kind of goes to maybe Chris or someone else with the utilities. Dylan kind of mentioned that hopefully, because we're collecting, hundreds of millions of dollars in the surcharge, that you won't have to do any, I guess, quote unquote, future borrowing for Empower programs. Do you feel like the utilities feel like that's correct or possible, or maybe you need more time to think about that one, but how do you feel about the potential of kind of using that current surcharge stream as funding the current program year? I think I asked that right.
Yeah, this is Chris Walls from BGE. I like your other point of we would need some more time to consider it. It's a fair question and need more time to consider it. And then, certainly in the context of just unpacking MEA's proposal even in more detail and overlaying what Dylan has proposed on how to deal with it, really understanding it more thoroughly. And of course, I would offer or open it up to any of the other utility representatives to make a comment on Dan's question as well.
See, I shouldn't have given you the option not to answer, but that's.
Dan, this is Jeff here. We've kind of done it both ways over the years, where because of the structure of our contract with our demand response, it's been an expense program. So we have experience with that, and it's been like that since day one. So as Chris stated, since we're looking at changing it up, we just need to dig a little bit deeper, probably ask a few more questions, but intrigued, as I said earlier.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair, because the demand response programs have a little different cost recovery structure than the energy efficiency programs for the utilities that have them.
Right.
Right. Thank you.
Yep.
Yes, Joe.
Hi there. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't just ask this question, at least as a placeholder for discussion or thought at some point, and that is just the the implications for evaluation, and how you determine whether people have attained 75% or 85% or whatever of goal. And it sounds, Dylan, like you've been involved with this in some other states in recent years, and I was wondering if you could speak to how processes change, or what fundamental elements of those processes are. I just give an example. When I first came into the evaluation business, I think it was probably, I came into the business about the same night that the California utilities were knocking on the governor's door to have him overturn the PUC decision about what the savings were, because they weren't they weren't going to get the money they thought they should be getting. And so it was very high tension, a lot of very high tension discussions going on back then, at least in that context. And I know even in Maryland, where we have the only real attainment, requirement, or that, that's closely monitored, is with respect to goal, where in the early years of Empower, our evaluation discussions and processes were much more tense than they are now. And that's partly just because, people have gotten to know each other and more trust and that sort of thing over time. But it's also because for goal savings, which is a first year gross savings, so it's relatively simple, it's not lifetime, for determining goal attainment, we started basically deeming a lot of stuff. And when I say deeming, that means upfront, we all agree on what how we're going to evaluate things. And there's always some flexibility. And if things are just way wacky, we address it. But we have created at least a reasonably high threshold for the evaluators on the ex post side when, for determining goal attainment. There's a reasonably high threshold for us to go and say, oh, the lighting hours of use is now, 1 hour a day rather than 1.6.
So that's a long way to ask the question, either to answer now or something that I think should be discussed at some point, how that's being done in other states and, what your sense of that is.
Sure. Okay. So good questions, Joe. A couple of things. One, just at the highest level in terms of, the level of conflict or tension. I mean, OPC is really feels very strongly that a pay down of the balance is appropriate and necessary and timely. And as we've just talking about, I mean, mechanics alone, the amount of collections every year is enough to pay the program expense. So
can I just be clear, Dylan, because I'm not really talking about the pay down as much as just
but let me answer, Joe, because they're related.
Okay.
Right. Because so if you take that as a given, and I know not everybody here takes that as a given, but OPC takes that as a starting point, it results in the utilities not earning anything on ultimately on Empower. And so, yeah, it is. I totally understand why the utilities are comfortable with the status quo where they have what we think is high earnings, and the goals conversations. It's rigorous, but there's no money at stake. I understand why that is desirable at one level, but it doesn't result ultimately in a good structure. And so you need, we go back to that chart. It's very clear that having some performance-based earnings is an appropriate best practice, and I think there's data for that. So yeah, it does increase the stakes for the measurement and verification. I can follow up with more details on how different states do that, but I think in general we would find that Maryland would be well positioned for that because the state does have a very mature measurement and verification structure. So there's not necessarily a lot that inherently changes. I do think that change from annual savings to lifetime savings is a significant one. We've already decided we want to do that. So yeah, that's going to require deeming some additional things, and those would matter some more. So I know I'm not giving you a great answer to the question and can follow up with more detail, but a lot of other states figure out how to do this, and a lot of them we're starting with a much less mature measurement and verification infrastructure than Maryland has.
Okay, yeah, I've been asking around, and I'm sensing from people behind the scenes that there's still a lot of tension out there. Because I started calling around just to see whether I'm just being my normally curmudgeonly self and kind of rejecting anything new or whatever, or living in another decade. But I was hearing very similar stories from behind the scenes. And I'm not, to be clear, I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't have a performance incentive. I'm trying to figure out how to adapt the evaluation for it.
Yeah.
And that's up to y'all. It's up to other people above my pay grade, whether you have a performance incentive. There would be some adaptation that would be needed. And for example, now on gross savings, we locked down things for a 3-year cycle. Most of the assumptions related to gross savings. So the utilities have, as long as they get their participation and do the things that are in their control, then they can generally expect to make goal, right? But still, they have to. Oftentimes, they'll start. They have to introduce some CVR or some other things, right? To make goal too. So a lot of things go on, but we've distinguished between, for purposes of goal, where we try to lock down and give as much certainty as we can around the things that are outside the utilities' control, yep, versus cost effectiveness currently, where our policy is latest, greatest. And in that case, we want to inform stakeholders as best we can about the performance of those programs ex post. And if the cost effectiveness is zero, that's where it's going to land. We don't even, due to the latest information. And so,
yeah, and I do think, and that is, it is important to be very clear going into it which values are locked in and which aren't. And there is absolutely debate about that in different jurisdictions. That same jurisdiction I was just mentioning earlier about should it be 65 or 70 or 75 was also, which assumptions around net to gross should be also locked in, and which parameters are in principle within the control of the utilities as they design their programs. And unfortunately, some elements of net to gross are not inside the bounds of control of the utilities, and some theoretically are. So you definitely need to get really clear on which values it's appropriate to lock in. And there's definitely, in my view, a bunch of parameters that it's only fair to the utilities if you lock in, these are the assumptions that we're going to be making. That doesn't mean you have to lock in everything. And it could be that there's an adjustment that would be made in Maryland as a result of that.
okay. Yeah. Well, I would appreciate anything or context or people I could talk to just to try to anticipate that and think about the PIMs in the evaluation context as we go.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Thank you. I will follow up on that.
Lindsay. You're muted, Lindsay.
Hello, Judge and everyone. Sorry for that. I wanted to ask Dylan, if you don't mind, I wanted to ask you a question. And I will admit I was gone from 11 to 11:30 on something else. So I'm hoping this question didn't get asked. And if it did, forgive me and we can cover later. But just something that I wanted to ask you when you were thinking about this proposal. Did y'all consider the sort of the impacts of this proposal in the context of the changing goal structure and the likelihood that there's going to be a new set of programs?
Well, generally we consider that. In fact, I think we considered that this is a good time to establish what we think is a healthier system of cost recovery and performance-based earnings, because we are starting on something new and we want to have, the program administrators from a financial award aligned with those outcomes. We didn't look at, well, what program, how would different programs change? Because ultimately, I don't think a good performance-based earning should be program specific. It should be outcome specific. And so how much GHG did you save would be, an important weighting. And, to Chris's questions earlier about the relative weighting of those, I think that's you probably didn't hear that comment, but we absolutely were thinking now is a good time to make an adjustment so that there's a performance basis for earnings, and it is consistent with and aligns the new directions and the new choices and program designs the utilities are going to go through.
Got it. And I hear that totally makes sense. We're doing something new, so maybe it's time to take out and look at something new. But I guess from the program implementation standpoint, was that part considered, just the fact that we would be embarking on new programs, and there might be to say that we've sort of existed in a mature program state for quite some time, right? But I think everybody could agree that we're not going to be in a mature set of programs likely in this next cycle, and there might be some uncertainty there. Do you think that's fair?
Yes, I think that's fair, and I'm not sure how that would change this proposal. I think it could potentially influence target setting. Out of the gate, there's some uncertainty. We don't know. We don't have a track record of this or that. So that might affect your target setting, but I don't know how it would necessarily affect the structure of, you would have a performance-based earnings based on these outcomes. So I think that could affect, the slope. I mean, Empower was on a slope when those 2% goals were set, right? And not all the utilities were out of the gate hitting those targets, right? So maybe that's going to be true in the future. That might affect where on the ambitious but achievable spectrum you are in terms of setting those targets. I think that I'm sure that we will have those discussions as we turn to setting the actual goals. But I think the structure would stand, either way.
Okay. I was just curious if that's something that came up.
All right. Nicole, you have a question for Dylan?
Just a comment to follow up on the question. So Nicole Zeichner from OPC, we know that the commission is concerned about the amount of the balance, and we as an office are concerned about the amount of the balance. And we also know that performance-based earnings are a practice of the top energy efficient jurisdictions. So this seemed like a good time. We have a new goal, most likely a new greenhouse-based goal. So it did seem like a good time to try to start something new and align with some of these top jurisdictions. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Nicole. Anybody else for OPC? Oh, yes, Mr. Gravatt.
Good afternoon. Jim Gravatt on behalf of the Energy Efficiency Advocates. And just a comment, two comments, maybe more. I really appreciate all the work that OPC put into this, and the leveraging the MEA analysis, I think, is really useful. And I accept the premise that the priority here is to do something to pay down this amortization balance, because it does seem like those are very large costs that the ratepayers are paying every year. And then, the conversation about what we do for performance incentives, I think there's probably a lot of room for that discussion. But I also just wanted to reflect the comment that Lindsay just made about, since it's going to be a new set of programs, the programs are going to be changing. I am sure there are going to be some changes in the programs. But I don't know, and maybe the utilities do because they're already thinking about this. I don't know that the programs are all going to be completely different than what Empower has been doing for the last decade. And I certainly hope that, and actually, I have no doubt that the utilities are going to lean very heavily on program models and that they already have in place because they're working. So I don't, if there's this wholesale change that's going to occur in 24, that would be, I'd love to, for when we start talking about that. But I just don't see this enormous wholesale change all at once. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Yes, Lindsay.
I think I'm off mute. Okay. So I think the only thing, Jim, I very much appreciate that. I think the only thing I just would offer the group to consider, in some of the other jurisdictions where we're launching programs, there's been some hesitation to put, strict goals, because there is some acknowledgement that there is uncertainty. And I think that's just a relevant point to raise. Of course, we're going to build on the success that we've had the last decade, and that, I think that's a given. But I just wanted to raise that point that there is a shifting that is happening. That is the whole purpose of this group, right? We've been brought here to, one of the big parts is to change the goal structure and change what we're aiming for. And so that is going to result in some differences that we have yet to foresee. So I just wanted to raise that again, and appreciate everyone's comments. And we'll obviously, as the utilities go back and take everything that's been said today and be ready to respond more in depth.
Thank you, ma'am. All right. Anybody else have questions for Dylan? All right. Thank you very much for your presentation, sir. All right. We got 2 more to go. I say we push through those rather than taking lunch. Babatunde, are you with us, sir?
Yes, sir.
All right. Did you want to give a kind of a brief overview of your comments and then take questions, or you just want to jump right into questions, sir?
I can give an overview of our comments. So basically, our comments was based on the reports we did with Oculus in 2020. We had engaged Oculus to analyze the unamortized program costs accrued under the program, and to assess the potential of performance incentive mechanisms to finance the uncollected balance. In the report, two PIMs designs were proposed, and on the current structure of Empower, basically maintaining most of the critical elements of the program and providing incentives that would benefit both utilities and ratepayers. What I would like to highlight from the report, and this was because a lot might change based on the design and based on what happens in this group, and what mechanisms, what designs we come up for the PIMs. I just wanted to highlight the performance requirements or that would ensure successful implementations for PIMs. The first one I highlighted in our comments was ensuring that reported spending by utilities is less than approved budget. And Dylan had pointed out that utility spending has traditionally been lower than that, than the budget. I believe that it's important for an important element of PIMs is adopting an incentive component that ensures efficiency in spending and strict adherence to the approved budget, such that the utilities achieve energy savings within approved budget. The second one was evaluation. We believe that ensuring that both residential, commercial, and industrial sub-portfolios are cost-effective. It's gonna ensure that the programs benefit ratepayers. So it's important to create incentives to ensure that those portfolios are cost-effective. The third performance requirement for PIMs that we identified from the report was ensuring that program level savings meet or exceed designed program level benefit cost analysis. We believe that a balanced distribution of energy savings across programs that ensures that proposed benefits to ratepayers can be achieved. Ensures that the proposed benefits to ratepayers can be achieved in an efficient way. And if utilities can meet or exceed the benefits that forecasted in their 3-year plans, PIMs can help to improve that planning process to achieve those expected benefits. Another point that we highlighted from the report is that ratepayers pay, as currently designed, a lot of the risk from the uncollected program costs rests with ratepayers, as there are no penalties for missing energy saving goals. So with PIMs, we can change the risk distribution by creating incentives for utilities to improve their program design. And the last point we made was the true-up process. The true-up process is key to incentive mechanisms as it helps to balance revenues and costs. And it's important that we design the true-up process in such a way that we are able to create enough resources to meet up with not only the potential costs, but also incentives payments. Based on the design of the PIMs on the report, there's going to be an increase in ratepayer costs, especially at the start of the implementation of PIMs, and that will dissipate and gradually reduce over time, over the 10-year period that was designed in the report, and would be less than the status quo by the end of the 10 years. But of course, this report was done in 2020, and I believe there could be changes based on current realities. But it's important that we ensure that some of this, we keep an eye on some of this this performance requirement, so that we ensure that whatever PIMs we end up with is one that's effective and it helps us achieve the program goals. So that's it.
All right, thank you very much, sir. Any questions for MEA?
I think we have Julia.
Chris.
Thank you, Judge McLean, and thank you, Babatunde, for that summary. Just a couple of quick questions, and I noticed that you had sent the cost analysis in a PDF file, and given so much consideration has been made for OPC BEIC's presentation in terms of using MEA's data. Is there any way that we could get the specific spreadsheets and the assumptions that were built behind that PDF presentation?
Yes, Chris, I believe we have the spreadsheets, and I could share it with you.
Great, that would be wonderful. Thank you. And I think I only have one other follow-up question. Well, maybe just a couple, but anyway, the on your proposal, on the first page of what you had submitted, there was discussion about the cost benefit analysis, and we definitely agree, that cost benefit should be above 1. My understanding, and I haven't been involved in the details of these discussions, but I've heard that we're kind of moving away from a total resource cost test and moving more into a societal test as being one of the primary tests. I mean, both of those tests I think have been part of our discussions since we began this, but societal is potentially taking more of a priority, and I don't want to mischaracterize. But anyway, my point is or my question is, has MEA changed their position on that move? Are you suggesting that just total resource cost test should be used and not so much societal? If you could just clarify that, that would help. Thank you.
We haven't changed our position. The point I was just trying to say is whatever test is adopted, it's important that we ensure that it's cost effective, so it's greater than 1, basically.
Great. Okay, that's clear. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
All right, thank you, sir. Anybody else?
I think Julia had her hands up. Okay.
Sure. Julia, you got a question? You're getting off easy, sir. All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And finally, Maren, are you with us, ma'am?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Yeah, I think depends. It's all relative, right?
Yeah.
Did you want to give a brief overview of your comments, ma'am?
Yes, certainly. So I'm Maren Mahoney, speaking on behalf of the Series Energy Optimization Work Group, and we appreciate this opportunity to provide these comments. In general, we support the use of PIMs, which are a proven and effective tool to align public policy goals with cost of service utility business models. In our written comments, we posed 5 best practices when crafting and implementing PIMs. The first one is the PIM should encourage the delivery of cost-effective energy efficiency. Second, they should be based on clearly defined goals and activities that are sufficiently monitored, quantified, and verified. The third is they should be available only for activities for which the recipient plays a distinct and clear role in bringing about the desired outcome. Number 4, and by recipient there, we mean the recipient of the financial incentive. Number 4 is they should avoid perverse incentives. And number 5 is that PIMs should be set at an amount that is effective but reasonable, balancing and meeting the aforementioned principles. Moving on from there, we brought up a few PIMs that we thought were worthy of potential further discussion. And the caveat here is that we think that these PIMs should be crafted and discussed. they need to be tailored specific to each individual utility and customer class. So with that said, we did mention a PIM for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We did suggest equity-focused PIMs. For example, PIMs could provide financial rewards based on the utility's ability to increase enrollment of low to moderate income customers in financial assistance programs, who they could increase energy savings delivered to LMI customers and also decrease utility disconnections as a result of LMI customer participation in energy savings programs. We wanted to mention at this point too that the discussion that the small ad hoc work group had about metrics for LMI program delivery could serve as potential base for future PIMs. So things like the greenhouse gas abatement that's attributable to the LMI community, things like participation of renters versus homeowners, and impact on energy burden, and a few other items. And then finally, we suggested a few demand flexibility PIMs, such as increasing the percentage of residential customers enrolled in a demand response program, increasing the percentage of customers on a time of use rate, and then increasing the percentage of peak load shifting to off-peak times as a result of energy efficiency and demand response programming. We welcome the discussion on other PIMs. In fact, I forgot to mention at the beginning of my comments here that Dylan and Nicole, we greatly appreciate the proposal. I'm certainly interested in hearing more, digging a little deeper into the surcharge impacts on customer classes and utilities. So I don't know if that's an exercise. If you know, I just wanted to express that I am interested in that if you do embark on that exercise. And then finally, talking about cost recovery and funding. We don't have a position on the preferred cost recovery method. I was kind of interested in the utilities proposal, in their written comments, that they preferred a monetary award over an ROE adder. And I wasn't quite sure if I understood the rationale for that properly. So I'm just interested in that perspective. And like I said, we don't really have a position on it at this time. And that concludes the comments that we've submitted. And thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, ma'am. One quick question. Your PIM examples, were you suggesting multiple PIMs be used, or were you just kind of throwing these out as potential for consideration?
Yeah, the second, the latter, the potential consideration. I think, you know, it's important to make sure that it's important to move slowly and carefully with PIMs. So we're not trying to suggest, you know, let's throw 10 PIMs out there and see how it goes.
All right, thanks. That's what I thought. Just wanted to confirm. All right. Any questions, comments for Maren? Yes, Joe.
Yeah, I just highlight, because I think with Tunde's comments on with the cost effectiveness related goal related to the cost effectiveness test that we've discussed, and at least the goal and the PIM structure that I was hearing from Dylan, that there's some disconnect. So I'm just highlighting it, you know, but is that obvious? If I'm hearing right, the structure or the PIM that's being proposed by Dylan is related to program spending and attainment of goal, where our cost effectiveness is obviously much more involved in that. And includes net to gross, for example, where the goal, as I understand it, last discussed, was a gross savings goal. You also have all the non-energy benefits that are not considered in the PIM that I was hearing in the Dylan discussion. So just there is a disconnect, and going to perverse incentives, those are definitely, I think that's a really good caution, whether it's the goal or whether it's the PIM or whether it's your cost effectiveness test. In all of those cases, utilities are almost necessarily going to drive to whatever that goal is, and that could cause some strange things to happen sometimes.
Can I this is Dylan, just to interject, Joe? I'm not sure. You said that our PIM proposal was related to spending. The performance metric wouldn't be spending. The award would be calculated based on a fraction of program costs. So perhaps that's what you meant.
Yeah.
But just
yeah, I was just
okay.
I'm not seeing the connection with the cost of a more sophisticated or complicated whatever cost effectiveness regime that we've all been talking about.
Right, and I do think
that it could create a disconnect. I remember before the last program cycle, I don't remember whether you were around, Dylan, then, but at least one of the utilities coming into the hearing with their 3-year plan saying we can't make goal with cost effectively, and the response from the commission, if I recall correctly, was go make goal cost effectively. And so there's a lot of pressure on the utilities to go dream up groovy stuff, and so there can be a disconnect on that. That's all. That's what I would be worried about.
I'm not sure, Your Honor, if other people have their hands up. I'll pause.
Jim had his hand up, but he took it down. So go ahead. We can come back to him. So
just quickly to say, to my mind, some of this speaks to a net benefit, metric being really powerful. You can, the utilities have proposed a PIM that was around, cutting savings. OPC has proposed sort of an incentive to achieve, savings goals. I think you can discuss the merits of those. A number of states, the PIM with the greatest sort of numeric weight is sometimes a net benefit metric. So add up all the benefits, subtract all the costs. The numeric value of that, the bigger the utility can get that number, the more they earn, and that's a elegant approach. It's complex, and I actually think earlier in the goal conversation last year, OPC sort of proposed that could be one of the goals amongst others, and there wasn't a lot of interest in it. But to me, that's a very elegant way of getting at both maximizing benefits and minimizing costs.
If I could just say that I think that if I'm understanding, MEA is still proposing possibly a cost effectiveness related goal or a cost effectiveness related
threshold.
And that would be based on the primary test is what I'm also hearing from Tunde, and all of that, and that's nets, that's net savings, that's a net to gross ratio in there, and which is not currently in the GHG goal discussion. That was specifically excluded, and that doesn't include, there's a lot of things that go into that number that are not in the goal or the PIM that is being proposed on the with the OPC side. The incremental measure cost, right? Once you get into that cost effectiveness realm, you got incremental measure costs, which have not been a discussion in goal or even in our cost effectiveness discussions. You got net to gross, you got estimated useful lives, you got remaining useful lives, and the list goes on. And so that's where I would just be. I'm just like going to the perverse incentives and what can kind of happen if you have a goal that's somehow unrelated to the performance incentives that you're talking about. It's a larger discussion for sure, I think.
All right, I'm going to move on to Mr. Oliver. You had your hand up, sir?
Yes, sir. Thank you. This has been a very interesting discussion, but it's rather generic in nature. And I think before this moves forward very far, we need to get into the class considerations. In particular, from a commercial customer perspective, there's a lot being done in the commercial sector right now, apart from utility programs, to achieve improved energy efficiency and reduce GHG emissions. And we need to understand how these activities that are independent of utility programs affect the achievement of goals and affect the appropriate distribution of cost recovery responsibilities. This is particularly important in the context of programs such as Montgomery County's Building Energy Performance Standards, where buildings are being required to achieve specific standards apart from any utility program. AOBA is very active in those building energy performance standards considerations.
All right, thank you, sir. Anybody want to chime in on Mr. Oliver's comments before I move on to Mr. Gravatt? All right, thank you, sir. Mr. Gravatt.
Thank you, Your Honor. Jim Gravatt on behalf of the Energy Efficiency Advocates, and I just wanted to check to make sure that we're moving, or are we ready to move to a more general conversation away from series-specific proposal? My comment is triggered by series proposal and then some of the comments that came after, but.
I mean, I think we're still on series proposal. So if you want to jump on that and then, or if you want to hold, I'll defer to you, sir.
Well, rather than, I'll just say something. Thank you, Maren, for your filing of comments and your proposal. And I want to note in particular the importance of an equity metric. And I want to both go back to the goal framework that we talked about, and this is a little bit triggered by Joe's comment, where the goal framework actually does reference a certain portion of the savings come from equity, limited income, is not yet defined, but underserved customers. And I'm concerned, and when the time is right, Your Honor, I'd be interested to know how the joint utilities and MEA feel about this. But I'm concerned that if we're looking at a net benefits performance incentive mechanism, if we're looking at potential budget limits, things that utility proposal to, if they spend less, they earn potentially more. All of those things in my mind work against making sure that we adequately meet the needs of underserved populations. So I think that's something that's worth some discussion. This may not be the right time, but it was triggered by Maren's comments, and thank you for that.
No time like the present, sir. Maren, you want to weigh in, or?
I appreciate that, Jim. That's actually why we, obviously that's why we suggested some of those PIMs, or one or multiple, because as we know, like the status quo is not necessarily addressing some of the equity, the needs, and this is PIMs can be a very good vehicle and have been used in other states to address some of the equity issues. So that's why we wanted to bring that up as a potential consideration. And this, this has already been identified as a priority in terms of, the metrics that we've all had those many discussions and built up some consensus around that. So anyway, just to build on that. So thanks, Jim.
Thank you. And if I may, I'll just mention that Duke in the Carolinas has proposed, I can't remember how this, if the commission ruled on it, but they have a net benefits performance incentive. And they've said, look, our low income programs have negative net benefits. So the more we invest in low income, the less we earn. So they actually proposed an alternative earning mechanism for their low income programs.
Thank you, sir. Anybody from the utilities want to weigh in on the comments from Maren and Jim? They're speechless.
They really like it.
One way to interpret it. I think, is Chris going? Oh, here we go. All right, Lindsay.
Hi, Judge. Hi, Baron. I will say I just didn't want to leave you hanging in silence. Yes, we hear you, and yes, we will take it back. And I think we're going to have lots of conversation about all the discussion today. So we will take this into consideration and respond accordingly.
Fair enough. Thank you, Lindsay. Any other questions from Maren? All right. Thank you very much, ma'am. I appreciate it. All right. In terms of moving forward, it sounded like there were, I guess, obviously some areas that parties want to discuss further. They want to look at some numbers behind some of the proposals. So is that something that could be done over the course of the next week, and then we can meet next week to discuss, or we want more time to kind of hash this out a bit more?
Sure, I could send some of the figures behind our report to the group.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think a similar request was made for OPC. So if you guys could share the numbers, kind of how you got to the figures in your presentations, I think that'd be helpful, especially for the utilities. Chris, I saw you unmuted there. Did you want it? There you go.
Yes, Judge, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to respond to your question, and it sounds like Bobatunde understands that we would love to see the details and get the spreadsheets. Unfortunately, I can't make a commitment until we see the details as to whether a week is a good time or not. I apologize. I'm just not sure at this point, and I would certainly ask my utility compatriots if they have any comments about your question, which is a good one, is do we need a week or do we need more? I mean, I am sensitive too, as well, to the deadlines that we're all working towards as well.
Right, and I'm happy to give everyone another, some additional time if, it sounds like if we can kind of work towards, solidifying some of these proposals, maybe reach consensus. I don't know if that'll happen, but if we could kind of hash things out a little bit further, I think that might be helpful. Anyone disagree with that? Yes, Dylan.
Thanks, Your Honor. So as I said in the chat, we'll send our worksheets along. Those will be probably primarily helpful to the utilities on top of whatever Babatunde sends from the MEA analysis. But assuming those can get around soon, we think that will be helpful. I think for us, we can continue to do some reflection on the other proposals, in particular the utility proposal. I guess two kind of questions. One is, is there a way to evaluate any proposal, but I think in particular the utilities proposal, about what the impact would be on the amortized balance? And without that, it feels difficult to sort of be responsive to that direction from the commission. So I know I asked sort of Chris that question, and you got to think about it, but if there's a way to assess what does that proposal mean, what might it mean for that balance, I think that would be, I guess, a request. And then the other side of that is if people have specific requests for us to help assess our proposal further. I am interested in knowing them. I heard just differentiate between like residential and commercial, as that would be helpful. Marin and Bruce, I think, said that. I think that's pretty feasible for us to do. If there are other pieces of information or analysis or illustration that would be helpful in terms of OPC's proposal, it would be really helpful to hear those now. We won't make promises, but just at least hear requests.
Sounds good, Dylan. And to the extent, parties want to get together and discuss things offline between now and whenever our next meeting is, I certainly encourage that, and to ensure that everybody gets the information. I'll email out the I guess the service list for the PIMS, because it's a little bit different, because we've got the future programming work group, we've got the PIM work group, and the cost recovery work group all involved in this particular section. So I'll send out an email list as soon as we're done here. Mr. Oliver.
Yes, I'd just like clarification. Is it the expectation or the hope that we would reach a consensus without consideration of class impacts, or is it the expectation that over the next couple of weeks we will sufficiently develop the class impacts to support a consensus position?
Excellent question, sir. Hard to say. Consensus is always good. If we can get some solidified, proposals or options for the commission's consideration, that would be great. Hard to say, on the class issue. Obviously, I know that's important to you and your client, and some other folks on the call. So, hopefully, if you can kind of look behind the curtain and get some of the how the numbers kind of stack up, maybe that'll help things. But I don't want to go out on a limb and say, we're going to get consensus on the class issue. But if we could, that'd be fantastic.
Well, my expectation is that the class impacts would differ noticeably across utilities.
Probably. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, so I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah.
All right. So again, why don't we, rather than scheduling a meeting for next week and then having to cancel it because folks need more time, why don't we plan on, yes, Joe?
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's fine.
I was just going to point out that, so Nicole sent the joint utility formal document while we're in the meeting here. And I had almost and then decided not to at the last minute. We have numbers for the methane emissions benefits, as well as the fuel, CO2 greenhouse gas benefits, and criteria emissions benefits. And I can provide, the final clarification on case number 17 or whatever it was, that was used in the joint utility filing. So we have all of that. I will send it out to the larger group with your permission, and then we can discuss it at a future date or whatever, if anybody needs discussion. So you're muted, Judge.
No, that sounds great, Joe. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. So I'm not hearing anybody pushing back. So we'll plan on further discussions on PIMS on March 3rd. So we've got an open week next week, at least right now. Do we want to use that week to start discussing some of kind of the miscellaneous items that we've got left over, or we want to kind of hold off until, I guess it'd be probably March 10th or March 17th?
Judge, can you summarize or remind us what those items, low income goal, or
it's really whatever the parties want to address. I've kind of got a small list of my own. I know the low income issue was something that OPC had noted a while ago, but it's really it's really whatever the parties feel that they want to go back and readdress that we haven't, fully fleshed out. Next week may not be the ideal time to discuss it, since maybe parties don't have a running list of what they want to hit. I don't know. That doesn't answer your question though, but it's really kind of whatever the parties want. But it would be helpful to know ahead of the meeting what parties want to hit, so everybody can be prepared for it. Lori, you had your hand up, ma'am.
Yes, I did. One thought you've received, or the non-cost recovery folks, I think, on this group have received both our position and I think it's BPA combined with NEAT on workforce development. There was no consensus or near consensus. That might be good use of a week where the information is prepared and has been distributed. And I'm assuming there's an interest in conversation. So that may be a good opportunity to use next week. I don't think it'll take more than, I don't think it'll take a lot of time, but that coupled with some other stuff could make for a good agenda.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, I was going to see if folks wanted to discuss that this afternoon, but I know it just came out recently. So if I'm not piling on and folks can do a meeting on something that's not related to PIMS while still in cost recovery and still kind of get their thoughts together for the following week, that'd be fine. So why don't we, thank you, Lori, I appreciate that. Why don't we plan on meeting next week to talk about the workforce development proposals from the utilities and or not really the utilities, more the opposition of the utilities to BPA's and Friends proposal. And also maybe we can start, kind of a discussion or kind of listing the items that the parties want to hit, revisit once we finish PIMS. Does that sound good? At least that way everybody can be on the same page.
Nicole should speak for OPC. I was going to make a suggestion on limited income goals, but
okay.
Go ahead, Nicole.
And I'm sorry, Your Honor, I just wanted to clarify, would you like us to come to the next meeting with a list of other items that we would like to discuss, or would you like to know now what we might want to look at the next meeting?
I think if you guys could have a list of what you'd like to discuss, that we've hit or haven't hit for the next meeting, so we can talk about it, a little further down the road, I guess would be after PIMS. So everybody's kind of knows what to expect. So rather than, OPC coming up on like the 10th or the 17th saying, we'd like to talk about low income, and the utilities are like, well, we don't have our people here. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. Does that make sense?
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay.
That makes sense.
All right, great. Dylan, is that?
Nope, I'm all set.
Awesome. Anybody else? All right, I will get out that email list for all the PIM related stuff for everyone to circulate. And I will also get out a modified timeline to just reflect what we just talked about. So with that, we'll plan on seeing everyone next Thursday at 10, and enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, Judge.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.